Hey World History, this is Miss Corey. Welcome to U2-L1, Intro to Egypt, Old and Middle Kingdom. So congratulations on surviving Unit 1. That was a tough unit. I gave you a lot of assignments within that 1 week. Luckily for Unit 2, that's a lot more spread out, so it shouldn't be as crazy condensed. So your job, you're going to watch this Ed puzzle. You're going to answer the questions I ask you during the video today will be in blue text that I want you to answer directly on the Ed puzzle. And of course, if you have any questions, please let us know. We are here to help you. Learning targets, identify and examine dominant and non-dominant narratives about the development of cities, societies, and empires in Asia, the Americas, and Africa, and also to interpret surviving evidence about early human history and discern what we can and cannot know about early humans from these sources. All right, so when you hear the words ancient Egypt, what comes to mind? Probably a number of things come to mind. So you probably think of pharaohs. That's probably one of the most popular things to think about. Like Cleopatra. You might think about the movies that were made after ancient Egyptian stuff. You might think of mummies. You might think of King Tut. We'll get to him a little bit later in the week. You might also think of the big pyramids in Giza. And of course, the funny thing is that the Pizza Hut has one of the best views of the pyramids. Yeah, weird stuff. Anyway, so where is Egypt? Great question. Here we are in Minnesota. Here's Egypt, right here in northern Africa. So you can see that it is right next to what we call today the Middle East. So it really is a big crossroads between the Middle East and Africa. All right, so here's more of a zoomed in map of Egypt. Now, of course, this is with modern day borders. Of course, ancient Egyptian borders did not look like this. But you can see that the Nile River goes through all of Egypt. You will also see that here's Cairo, which is now one of the biggest cities in Egypt, as well as the Valley of the Kings, which is an important historical site, and the pyramids of Giza, which are right next to Cairo. All right, so the really sad part about all of this is that we will not even begin to scratch the surface of ancient Egypt. So there is over 3,000 years of history of ancient Egypt. Now let's put that into perspective a little bit. So in most of you in 10th grade, you had 1 year dedicated just to learning about US history. And that spans about 500-ish years. Now, this week, we only have 2 weeks to learn about ancient Egypt, and we got to get through 3,000 years. So we're not even going to give this any sort of justice whatsoever. All right, so the first thing you should know about ancient Egypt, it is broken up into 2 parts, like physically on a map. There is Lower Egypt and there is Upper Egypt. So Lower Egypt is here and Upper Egypt is here. And you're probably like, wait a minute, shouldn't that be flipped around? Shouldn't Upper Egypt be up here and Lower Egypt be down here? Yeah, I know it's a little confusing, but you got to think about the flow of the river. So, unlike the Mississippi River, which flows from the north to the south, the Nile River flows from the south to the north. So, this would be Upper Egypt because it is upriver, and this would be Lower Egypt because it is downriver. All right, so let's talk about the landscape just a little bit. So by the Nile River, it is very fertile and lush land. So as you can see here, here's a picture of the Nile. You'll see there's lots of trees. I mean, it's still pretty arid over here, like on this mountain, but there's a lot of vegetation. If it is not by the river, that means that the landscape is very dry, very deserty. Not a lot of things growing there, like you can see up here in this picture. Northern Egypt is mostly a flat plateau because that's where the delta of the Nile River is, so it makes it pretty flat. Versus southern Egypt, it looks like this, where it's very mountainous and it's very hard to pass these mountains on foot. All right, so here is the time frame of ancient Egypt. Oh my gosh, look at all these words. Don't worry, I will not be quizzing you on this. So it starts with the late pre-dynastic, which starts all the way back in about 3,400 BCE. All these dates are BCE, by the way. We don't get to CE until the Romans come. And we'll talk about that in the Roman Empire. Don't worry when we get to that unit. So we start with the late pre-dynastic, then we go to early dynastic, then we go to the Old Kingdom, then the first intermediate period, and then the Middle Kingdom, and the second intermediate period, and the New Kingdom, and the third intermediate period, and the late period, and the Ptolemaic period, and then finally the Roman period. Oh my gosh. Oh, there is so much to learn about, but we're not going to learn about all of those. We're just going to focus on the 3 big kingdoms here, which are the Old, the Middle, and the New. All right, another good thing you need to know is dynasties. So, what are dynasties? So, this will be important to learn even when we do like ancient China and Japan. So, it is a line of family rulers in a country or kingdom, meaning that everyone ruling in a dynasty is related to the first person who started that dynasty. So, for example, if the pharaoh here started the 23rd dynasty in Egypt, that means all of his descendants, or all of these people below him, would be somehow related to him. Now, it's not necessarily father to son. It could be like father to nephew to cousin to uncle to brother, like usually it's pretty messy. It's not very like neat. But a new family line would mean that is the start of a new dynasty, and there are 33 Egyptian dynasties total. All right, switching topics just bit. What is the difference between monotheistic and polytheistic? So mono means one. That means the people in the region or in the religion worship just the one God. Big examples that would be Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Poly means many. So that means that the people in the religion worship multiple gods. We'll talk about that when we talk about Hinduism, as well as ancient Egyptian religion, as well as Greek mythology. Those would all be considered polytheism. All right, now this is probably a word you all know. Pharaoh. So, what is a pharaoh? So, a pharaoh is a person who is the head of either Lower Egypt or Upper Egypt or both Lower and Upper Egypt. So, the Egyptian word for pharaoh, by the way, is Nezubit. There's a little trivia for you. And historians may also interchange the word pharaoh with king. They mean the exact same thing. So, don't get freaked out by that. And pharaohs were believed to be the reincarnation of Horus, who is the god of kingship as well as the sky. So, if the pharaoh is a reincarnation of the god Horus, not only would they have the role of politically ruling Egypt, but what other role? Take your best guess. I don't want any I don't knows. Religiously, yeah, that's right. The pharaoh would also be in charge of overseeing religion, or at least play some sort of role in religious ceremonies. They're also there to enact laws, collect taxes, be the commander in chief of the military, and also to maintain something called Ma'at. So, Ma'at literally means order, so it is considered the order of the universe, balance, and justice. So, how do historians know mostly exact dates and timelines of ancient Egypt? Yeah, that is weird, right? When we were looking at that big list of all the periods, you saw that it was down to the exact year. That's right. It is just kind of by luck almost, because the historians have found something called the King's List. And the King's List is an inscription on a temple by Pharaoh Seti I. This is an actual picture of what the King's List looks like. So Pharaoh Seti I died back in 1290 BCE. And this is really important because it listed 75 predecessors before him in chronological order. That is how historians know exact dates of when pharaohs ruled. The hard part is that, as you can see, it is fragmented. So many of the names are missing, or historians have to take guesses on them. It also gets a little confusing because some of these inscriptions are like based in mythology, so they include like ruling gods in their mythology that ruled during time periods as well. But for the most part, it is a huge help for ancient Egyptian historians. So prior to like the pharaohs and the pyramids and all that kind of stuff, humans have been living in the Nile Valley for many, many, many centuries. So dating back all the way to 700,000 BCE. And about 5,400 to 3,400 BCE, there was a big shift to agriculture in the Nile Valley. So that means that people would fish, they would raise sheep, goats, they would farm wheat and barley, they would also create irrigation canals. So remember when we talked about last week with flooding, when the Nile floods, there's lots of silt for farming. There's also social and political power shift, meaning that the people who had more wealth had more power. So before unified Egypt, there were things called city-states. City-states are cities that rule itself. That means that the city has its own government, its own military, everything. There's no larger country or kingdom that rules over it. It also serves as the cultural, religious, and economic center for that entire population. So each city state typically had a main god to worship. We'll talk about that too when we get to the Greeks as well. And Egyptian city states traded with places as far away as Afghanistan. So, again, to put in perspective, here's Egypt. Afghanistan is all the way over there. That's a lot of trade. Wow. So, how do historians find Egyptian artworks, jewelry, inscriptions, and other cultural pieces, such as this necklace here? Take your best guess. Graves. Yeah, historians like to dig up graves. The reason for this is because these items are buried underground, so that means they are very well preserved. Graves are usually also well marked with like tombstones, just like we have today. And in these graves, historians have found things such as copper all the way as far as from Palestine. So Palestine's right here, Egypt's right there. They've also found lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, which I just showed you in the last map. They would also include things like tomb inscriptions. One of the most iconic tomb inscriptions found in ancient Egyptian stuff described a battle with the Amu people, which are actually people all the way from Asia. All right, next let's talk about the Old Kingdom. So the Old Kingdom is kind of the fun kingdom because that's where we get our pyramids. So the Old Kingdom was from 2686 to 2160 BCE. We got the pyramids. There's also some foreign relations that went on between Egypt and Lebanon, Libya, and Nubia as well, which we'll talk about at the end. But first, let's talk about pyramids. So, why do you think it is important for historians and archaeologists to study the pyramids at Egypt? Yeah, well, besides them being kind of these cool triangles that stick out of the ground, there are some other good benefits to learn from them, such as Egyptian math and technology, royal power, so how the government was structured with royalty, Egyptian wealth. It takes a lot of materials to make these pyramids. Where are the Egyptians getting them? Like what trades they have? Also, human organization. It doesn't take just one or two people to build these pyramids. It takes thousands of people. So, how did the government make that? Also, government control. Kind of again, how did they get all these people to make these pyramids? Glorification of the pharaoh, as you can see here. Big triangles dedicated to one person must mean they're pretty important people. And also, there are religious temples within the pyramids themselves. So the not so great parts of pyramids. So the thing about tombs during this time, they have very few inscriptions. So not a lot written on the walls and stuff like that. So not a lot for historians to collect. Also, as you probably know, pyramids are robbed very often, including the mummy. Yeah, they would take the dead pharaoh out, and gosh knows where the dead bodies went. All right, so the most famous pyramids, of course, are the Great Pyramids of Giza. There are other Egyptian pyramids out there, but these are just the most famous ones. So here is a map of the pyramid. So this is like a bird's eye view if you were looking like as a bird flying in the sky down. So we got the Pyramid of Khufu here, which is one of the big ones, the Pyramid of Khafra here, and then the Pyramid of Menkaura, which is down here. So tell me, name one thing you notice about the map. Name one thing you notice on the map about the Pyramid of Giza's site. Sorry, sometimes I talk so fast, I don't know what I'm saying. All right, so there are a lot of things to notice. So the Pyramid of Khufu, that's one of the big ones. That would be the father, and Khafra is the son. And then Menkara would be the grandson. You'll also see there's three tiny pyramids over here, which are the Pyramid of the Queens. I'll show you a picture of that in the next slide. Those were the three of Menkara's favorite queens. They got their own little pyramids to go with it. You'll also see that there is this field here with a bunch of other kind of more like tomb graves. Those were for royal and political figures. They got important grave sites as well, but of course, they didn't get a giant pyramid. You'll also see that there are boat pits. Yeah, you're like, wait, isn't this the desert? It is the desert. But boats were seen as like kind of a tool for the pharaohs to go into the afterlife, like a way of transportation. So they're typically boats buried with them. You will also see that there is the Great Sphinx, another great icon of ancient Egypt. That is actually the entrance point to Khafra's Pyramided Temple, which is right back here. Oh, yeah, and you'll also see the builders' quarters as well. So you're probably like, wait, builders' quarters? Yeah. So whoever built the pyramids, be it like enslaved people or people that the government forced to like serve to build the pyramids, it's still a big debate in history of who actually built the pyramids. No, it's not aliens, I'll tell you that. So they would live on site and then they would just go to work in the morning and start building on the temple. But they would get housing, food, and also some workshops were found around there too as well. All right, so again, here's a picture of the three Great Pyramids of Giza. These are the three little queen tombs right here. And I shouldn't call them little because if you look at this picture, there's someone walking. So what? They would be like probably like this little dot right here next to the pyramids. They're still giant. All right, so here's a giant list of the Old Kingdom rulers. Of course, here's Khufu right here, there's Khafra right there, and Menkaura right there. So foreign relations in the Old Kingdom. So the Old Kingdom was a little bit different than the Middle and New Kingdom, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but they were a lot more isolated. They didn't do as much trading as Egyptians did in the Middle and New Kingdoms. They were typically pretty peaceful with nations over here in the Middle East. But they did have some fights and wars with the Nubians, which I'll talk about in just a second, as well as Libya, which is this, of course, is a modern day map, but Libya is right over in here. All right, so Nubia. What is Nubia? Nubia is the area of land south of Egypt, which would be in like the northern part of modern day Sudan. So Nubia is going to be kind of in this pinkish color right here. And during the Old Kingdom, Nubia was not like this one big country. It was more broken up into a bunch of little chiefdoms. So Nubia was a very important part of the economy of the world during this time. The reason for that is because it had a lot of desired goods, such as frankincense and myrrh, which are kind of the sap that comes from trees, like you can see right here. So that's what the tree looks like, and that's the sap. Also, animal skins, gold, ivory, and ebony wood. So ebony wood is really unique because on the outside, it's kind of like this tannish color, but on the inside, it's like pure black. It's also a very hard wood. So one of the pharaohs during this time, his name was Pepi II. He sent his military commander to raid Nubia for materials, but also to capture people for slavery. So slavery did happen in ancient Egypt. We won't talk about it too much because honestly, we just don't have the time. All right, next let's talk about the Middle Kingdom. So kings were warriors. That's right. Pharaohs were warriors. They had the obligation to conquer new land. That was part of their duty as being a pharaoh. So where did Egypt like to get this land? They liked to invade Nubia because it had all the cool resources, right? So annexation. That's kind of a big word, but it'll pop up throughout the year. So annexation is when a country, such as Egypt, takes over another country's territory using its military. It could just be the whole territory together, or it could just be a little part of the territory. And it doesn't always necessarily mean that there was battles or there was a war. What happened often, especially with ancient Egypt, because there was such a big military force, that Egypt would just take its army and it could just walk right in to another country and claim it as their own. That country wouldn't fight back because they knew that they could not take down the Egyptian military. And it's really not also a good way to make friends with other countries because people are going to hate you if you walk in and take over their stuff. There's also forts made to show military control of these new territories as well. So one of those forts was made by Senusret the First and Senusret the Third. Both of those were pharaohs, by the way. And they annexed the northern part of Nubia. And these pharaohs built walls and forts along the second cataract of the Nile. So you're probably like, wait a minute, what is a cataract? And no, I'm not talking about the eye illness cataract. There's another kind of cataract. So cataracts are areas of the river, so in this case, the Nile, where it is wider, shallower, a lot more rapids, rocky, like you can see right here, and there's possibly islands as well. So this is a picture of what a Nile cataract is. Most rivers have cataracts, even the Mississippi has cataracts as well. And cataracts can be up to 30 miles long. So here on the map, there's a bunch of different cataracts. So like this is the first cataract. Down here at the very, very bottom is going to be the second cataract, right down here in Kush, which is part of Nubia, by the way. So how do historians know that these walls and forts existed? Great question. Historians know that because these stone tablets called steles were found around the second cataract, giving praise to military success of the two pharaohs. There's also ruins of these forts as well, and soldier graffiti on building material and rocks, like you can see up here. So Egyptian soldiers were recruited among the common folk to become soldiers. Pretty much all males had to be. Some made careers out of being a soldier, but most did just their one-time campaign, just their one-time service to the government. All right, like we said before, Egyptian pharaohs liked to build forts. So here's an artist rendition of one of the forts in Nubia. So name one thing that you observe about this artist rendition of this fort. So you might say things like, oh, there's a port, there's some boats, it's on the water, it has big walls, it looks like it has big gates, looks like it has like some sort of structure maybe laid out right here for living quarters or working quarters or something like that. Yeah, they're pretty sophisticated places. So forts were typically placed on the Nile and by trading roads. They were also placed by quarries and mines. So if you went like a few miles outside of this fort, you would find these quarries here. As you can see where like craftsmen would chip away the stone out of the cliffside. And also forts would include huge walls. They would include ramparts, which are super fortified walls, and ditches, bastions, which are walls that are at an angle so you can shoot like bow and arrow from many directions. There was also fortified gates with drawbridges, and inside the walls would have barracks, workshops, offices, and temples to the gods. So merchants from Nubia could not pass without Egyptian fort's permission, meaning that any merchandise that came from Nubia into Egypt had to go through customs. It had to be taxed. The most famous of these fortresses in Nubia was called the Fortress of Buhin, which is what this artist rendition is of. So the Fortress of Buhin was built and expanded in about 1878 to 1843 BCE by Senusret III. And after the 13th dynasty, which is about 1700 BCE, Egyptians really didn't have a stable government anymore. So the Egyptian government lost political control of the foreign forts, including the Fortress of Buhin. So here is a modern-ish picture of what the Fortress of Buhin, what is left of it. So this, I think, was taken back in like the 70s. That's why it's not like the greatest of qualities. But you can still see the walls. You can see where maybe the gates were. It's still pretty impressive that it's still standing like that today. So what do you think happened to the soldiers living in the Fortress of Buhin after Egypt lost political control of it? So after Egypt left Fortress of Buhin, soldiers actually turned their barracks just into their normal houses. They'd get married, they'd raise their families there. Many of them actually just stayed in Nubia and would eventually become part of the Nubian society, which would become rivals of Egypt itself. All right, wrap this up. Today we learned about dynasties, monotheism, polytheism, pharaoh, the king's list, city-states, characteristics of the Old Kingdom, as well as the Middle Kingdom, and pyramids. Next up, you're going to do U2-L2, the New Kingdom. If you have any questions, please let me know. I am more than happy to answer them. Thanks for watching. Bye.